Before emojis, before the alphabet you're reading right now, before any written language you know, there were the runes. These aren't just letters. According to Norse mythology, these symbols cost a god 9 days of agony hanging from the world tree. They weren't invented, they were discovered. And for over 1,000 years, people believed they held power over life, death, and fate itself. But here's what's wild. When archaeologists finally decoded what these runes actually say, the truth turned out to be far stranger than the myth. Some of these inscriptions are curses so intense they're still giving scholars chills. Others are just grocery lists. Today we're cracking the code of the most mysterious alphabet in European history, and by the end you'll understand why these symbols refuse to stay buried. But first, let's pause for a moment. Why would an alphabet be so precious that a god would sacrifice himself for it? Maybe because writing isn't just about communication, it's about defying death itself. It's about making the temporary eternal. And that's always been the most dangerous magic of all. If you're drawn to uncover the hidden myths shaping our world, subscribe. This is Beyond Mythology. The story begins with a god willing to torture himself for knowledge. Odin, the one-eyed king of the Norse gods, had a problem. He could see the future, and it was dark. Ragnarok was coming, the end of everything. But somewhere in the cosmos, there was knowledge that might help. So Odin pierced himself with his own spear and hung himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree that connects all 9 realms. No food, no water. 9 days and nights of screaming agony. And then, on the edge of death, he saw them. The runes. They fell from the tree, and in that moment of revelation, Odin understood. These weren't just symbols. They were the fundamental forces that shaped reality itself. Each rune contained the essence of a cosmic principle: wealth, strength, journey, death, ice, harvest. Think about that for a moment. What kind of knowledge is worth 9 days of self-torture? The Norse understood something we've forgotten, that true wisdom always comes with a price. Odin's sacrifice wasn't just mythological drama. It was a profound truth about learning. You have to risk everything to gain everything. Now here's where it gets interesting. This myth was recorded in the 13th century, but our earliest runic inscriptions date back to the 2nd century CE. That's a 1,000-year gap between the first carved rune and the first written story about where they came from. So did Odin really hang from a tree to discover these symbols? Obviously not, but the Norse told this story for a reason. They understood something profound about the nature of written language, that capturing human thought in permanent symbols is genuinely magical. It transforms the invisible into the visible, the temporary into the eternal. And they weren't alone in this belief. Ancient Egyptians thought hieroglyphs were the words of the gods themselves, carved by Thoth, the scribe. Mesopotamians believed cuneiform was a gift from the divine. But the Norse went further. They made the price of literacy divine suffering. They understood that to master language is to master reality, and they were right about that part. Meet the Elder Futhark, 24 symbols that served as the foundation of Germanic writing for over 600 years. The name comes from the first 6 runes: Fehu, Uruz, Thurisaz, Ansuz, Raidho, Kenaz, Futhark. But calling these letters misses the point entirely. Each rune was a complete concept, a word, and a symbol rolled into one. Fehu wasn't just the F sound. It meant cattle, which meant wealth, which meant power and social status. And isn't that fascinating? Today our wealth is digital, numbers in accounts, cryptocurrencies that exist only in code. But 1,000 years ago, wealth was something you could touch, something that breathed and moved and grazed in your fields. Fehu reminds us that all wealth, digital or otherwise, is ultimately just collective belief made manifest. Uruz wasn't just you. It was the aurochs, those massive wild bulls that could kill you if you weren't careful. Strength through danger. Think about our modern relationship with power. We still celebrate the same paradox. The idea that true strength comes from dancing with destruction, from controlled risks that could break us. The entire system was organized around the Norse understanding of reality. 24 runes divided into 3 groups of 8, called Aetir. The first Aet dealt with material wealth and survival. the second with forces of nature and conflict, the third with spirituality and social bonds. It's like they mapped the entire human experience onto an alphabet. Let's talk about Tiwaz for a second. This rune looks like an arrow pointing up, and it represents the god Tyr, the one who sacrificed his hand to bind the wolf Fenrir. When Norse warriors carved this rune on their weapons, they weren't just making a T sound. They were invoking the principle of honorable sacrifice for victory. How often do we make that same trade today? Sacrificing time with family for career advancement, giving up personal freedom for collective security. Tiwaz is still with us, we just don't recognize it anymore. Or Thurisaz, the thorn, the giant, the destructive force that's also protective. Thor's hammer crushing enemies, but also the thorny hedge that keeps your farm safe from wolves. One symbol containing contradiction, because life itself is contradictory. Look at our technology. The internet connects us to all human knowledge, but also to endless distraction. Nuclear power can light up cities or destroy them. Thurisaz understood this duality 1,000 years before we invented it. This is where the mythology gets really interesting. Each rune was connected to specific gods, specific stories, specific cosmic forces. But here's what archaeology tells us. Most of the time, people just use them to write normal stuff. And maybe that's the most magical thing of all. How the sacred and the mundane interweave. How the same symbols that invoke cosmic forces also record the price of fish at market. The Norse didn't separate the mystical from the practical. They lived in a world where buying a comb and invoking Thor's protection were equally real acts. This sword says Ranja, probably the blacksmith's name. This comb says Harja made me. This ring says I am called a wolf. Not exactly earth-shaking mystical pronouncements, just people making their mark, claiming their work, declaring their identity. But then you find something like the Björketorp runestone in Sweden, and suddenly the hair on your neck stands up. This monument contains what might be the most intense curse ever carved in stone. It roughly translates to, "I hide here runes of power. Whoever destroys this monument will be tormented by insidious death and destruction." And then, just to be absolutely clear, I prophesy destruction. The stone is over 1,400 years old. It's still standing. Nobody's touched it. Here's a question for you. If you found this stone in your backyard tomorrow, would you have the courage to move it, even knowing it's just medieval superstition? Something about those words, carved with such certainty into eternal stone, still carries weight, still makes you wonder. By the 8th century, something interesting happened to the runes. They evolved. The 24-symbol Elder Futhark transformed into the 16-symbol Younger Futhark. Why reduce the alphabet? Because the language was changing, and people needed efficiency over mysticism. There's something almost tragic about this. Even sacred systems have to evolve or die. Not even the gods can escape change. The runes that Odin bled for had to adapt to survive, had to become more practical and less mystical. Progress always demands sacrifice, sometimes even from divinity itself. This is where runes became genuinely powerful, not through magic but through communication. The Viking Age was beginning, and these symbols were about to spread across the known world. From Greenland to Constantinople, from Ireland to Russia, Norse traders and raiders left their mark, literally. But the real explosion happened back home. Between 950 and 1200 CE, Scandinavians went absolutely crazy for runestones. We're talking about over 6,000 massive stone monuments, most of them in Sweden alone. Imagine if every family in your neighborhood decided to carve their personal business into granite slabs and plant them by the highway. These aren't religious texts or mystical incantations. They're Viking Age social media. Ingvar had this stone raised in memory of his brother Østen, who died in the east. Holmfast raised this stone in memory of his father Sproti, who lived in Tensta. Toki and his brothers raised this stone in memory of their mother Thorgerda, who was the most skilled woman in Hedmark. Sound familiar? The human need to be remembered, to leave a trace, to say, "I was here and I mattered." That's exactly what we're doing on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok. We're all carving digital runestones, hoping someone will remember our names. The medium changes, but the message stays the same. Don't let me disappear into time. But some of them get spicy. This one says, Yalabanki had these stones raised as a monument to himself while he lived. He alone owned the whole of Tabi. God help his soul. Imagine being so confident in your real estate empire that you commission your own memorial while you're still alive. That's some serious Viking Age flexing right there. My personal favorite is in Denmark, the Jelling stones, basically Denmark's birth certificate. King Harald Bluetooth raised these stones around 965 CE, and one of them makes this bold claim. Harald ordered this monument made in memory of Gorm, his father, and in memory of Thyra, his mother. That Harald who won for himself all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. Talk about a power move. I conquered 2 countries and converted an entire people to a new religion. Also, I love my parents. All carved in runes that were supposedly pagan magic, announcing his conversion to Christianity. Here's the fascinating contradiction. Harald is using the old alphabet to announce the new faith, the pagan symbols to proclaim Christian victory. It's like he understood that symbols transcend the beliefs that created them, that the medium can outlive the message. This contradiction reveals something crucial. By the 10th century, runes weren't mystical anymore. They were just the alphabet, the tool everyone used to make permanent statements, which makes what happened next even more dramatic. The runes died slowly, then all at once. As Christianity spread through Scandinavia, Latin became the language of power, education, and eternal salvation. By 1200, runic literacy was basically dead except in remote corners of Sweden and Norway. Even alphabets have their Ragnaroks, their endings that are also beginnings. The Latin script didn't just replace the runes, it consumed them, the way Christianity consumed paganism. Not through force alone, but through offering something the old system couldn't. Connection to a vast network of knowledge and power that stretched from Rome to Jerusalem. The last official runic document we know of was written in 1570, a letter in runes sent to a Danish nobleman. After that, silence. A writing system that had lasted over a millennium vanished in a couple of generations. Imagine if tomorrow everyone just stopped using our alphabet. How quickly would we forget how to read it? But here's where the story gets weird again. In the 1600s, European scholars rediscovered the runes and completely lost their minds. These guys had been raised on Latin and Greek classical texts, and suddenly they found indigenous European writing that was older than Christianity in their homeland. Swedish scholar Johannes Burrus became convinced that runes contained the secret wisdom of the ancient world. Danish antiquarian Ole Worm created the first systematic runic alphabet charts. These guys weren't just translating, they were myth-making. They were trying to resurrect not just the symbols, but the worldview that created them. By the 1800s, nationalism had grabbed hold of the runes and wasn't letting go. German romantics decided runes proved the superiority of Germanic culture. Wagner put them in operas. Artists painted Vikings performing runic magic that never actually existed. The runes became symbols of everything they had never been, pure, untainted, racially specific wisdom. Then the 20th century happened, and some very bad people appropriated runic symbols for very bad purposes. We're not going to dwell on that, but it's worth noting that authentic historical runes have nothing to do with racial theories or political ideologies. The Vikings themselves were remarkably diverse and pragmatic people who cared more about profit than purity. Which brings us to today. Walk into any occult bookstore and you'll find shelves of books about runic divination, runic magic, runic meditation. Most of it would be completely unrecognizable to an actual Viking. But here's the thing. Maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe the fact that we keep reinventing the runes shows their vitality. A myth that doesn't evolve dies, and the fact that we're still finding meaning in these symbols 1,000 years after their practical use ended, that says something about their power. Here's what we actually know about historical runic practices. People carved them on objects for identification, commemoration, and sometimes protection. They associated them with gods and cosmic forces. They probably used them for divination, throwing marked sticks or stones and interpreting the patterns. But the elaborate mystical systems you see today, the detailed meanings for each rune in every possible combination, That's modern invention, not ancient wisdom, which doesn't make it worthless. Modern spiritual practices can be valuable for modern people. But it's not what the Vikings actually did. What they did do was understand that symbols have power beyond their literal meaning, that carving your intention into permanent matter changes something in the world, that writing is a form of magic, whether you're invoking gods or just recording who made your comb. So what's the real magic of the runes? It's this. When you learn to read them, you're literally hearing the voices of people who died 1,000 years ago. This runestone says, Gunnar raised this stone in memory of his brother Roger, who died in the east with Ingvar. God rest their souls. Somewhere around 1040 CE, a man named Gunnar was grieving his brother. He wanted the world to remember that Roger existed, that he mattered, that he died far from home on some adventure that probably seemed important at the time. 1,000 years later, you and I know Roger's name. We know he had a brother who loved him. We know they believed in God by then, but still used the old alphabet. We know Roger died in the East, probably on one of those expeditions to Constantinople that Swedish Vikings were famous for. That's the real magic. Not supernatural power over the physical world, but something far more profound, the defeat of time itself. Human consciousness preserved in stone, waiting for someone to come along and wake it up. Remember Odin's sacrifice? 9 days hanging from the world tree bleeding for wisdom? Well, Odin bled so these symbols could exist. And today, a millennium later, they still bleed, but now it's human stories that pour from the stone. Memories, love, loss, the desperate desire to be remembered. Every alphabet does this. Every writing system is magical in this sense. But the runes carry something extra. They preserve a worldview. When a Viking carved the rune Fehu, he wasn't just making an F sound. He was thinking about cattle, wealth, responsibility, the relationship between humans and animals, the way prosperity can be both blessing and burden. The mythology matters because it reveals how these people thought about the act of writing itself. They understood that preserving human thought was literally divine power, the ability to speak across centuries, to make the temporary permanent, to transform breath into stone. Odin's sacrifice wasn't just about getting some symbols. It was about understanding that knowledge always costs something, that wisdom requires transformation, that to truly communicate across time, you have to be willing to bleed a little. And here we are, still bleeding onto keyboards and touchscreens, still desperate to leave our mark, still trying to defeat death through symbols. The runes taught us that writing isn't just communication, it's immortality made manifest. Today we're surrounded by symbols carrying meaning across time and space. Every text message, every email, every video script is performing the same magic the runes performed, capturing human thought and flinging it into the future. The difference is permanence. Your digital messages might disappear when the servers die. These stone runes have been shouting their messages for over 1,000 years, and they're not done yet. Maybe our online posts are the new runestones, not carved in granite, but floating in invisible clouds of data. We're all trying to leave traces, to say, I was here, I mattered, remember me. The question is, will anyone be reading our digital inscriptions 1,000 years from now? Or will they fade like breath on winter air? So the next time someone tries to sell you ancient runic wisdom, remember, the real wisdom is right there in plain sight. It's the voices of farmers and warriors, merchants and mothers, all insisting that their brief time on this planet mattered enough to carve in stone. They achieved immortality not through magic, but through the simple act of writing things down. In a world where so much communication is temporary, maybe that's the most powerful lesson the runes can teach us. The symbols change. Stone becomes paper, becomes pixels, becomes light. But the desperate human need to be remembered, to speak across the void of time, to defeat death through language. That stays constant. That's the true magic Odin died for. That's why these ancient letters refuse to stay buried. They're still here, still speaking, still bleeding stories into the present. And as long as someone remembers how to read them, a little bit of those long-dead Vikings remains immortal. Had you ever glimpsed the secrets of the runes before? Or is this your first step into their mystery? Tell me in the comments. And if you seek meaning where myth and history meet, like, share, and subscribe. This is Beyond Mythology.